You have a laugh you only use around certain people. Not a fake one, a real one that simply does not come out anywhere else. There is a version of you that exists inside one group chat and nowhere else in your entire life. And if you had to explain that version to your family, you would not know where to begin. And you have felt the very specific dread of two friend groups meeting at the same party. That dread is worth paying attention to. Most people read it as guilt. They assume it means one of those versions must be a performance, and that somewhere underneath all of them, there is a real self being quietly betrayed. The real answer is stranger than that. You are not hiding one true self behind several false ones. You do not have a single self to hide. What you have is a machine that builds a self on demand, tuned to whoever is watching, and it has been running that way since long before you had any language for it. The dread you feel when two groups collide is not a moral signal. It is a mechanical one. Two incompatible sets of assembly instructions have arrived at the same moment. Start with what your sense of self is actually made of. The psychologist Mark Leary spent his career on a question that sounds simple. What is self-esteem for? The intuitive answer is that it is a kind of possession, a reservoir of good feeling about yourself that you carry around and top up. Leary's evidence pointed somewhere else entirely. Self-esteem behaves like a gauge. It is a readout, a needle on a dial, and the thing it measures is not how good you are. It is how much value you currently hold to the people around you. He called it a sociometer, a meter for your social standing. Sit with what that implies. A gauge that measures other people's regard cannot possibly produce one number for your whole life. It has to sample. It reads the room you are standing in, which means the self it reports back to you is always necessarily a self relative to an audience. There is no version of that reading that floats free of who is present. So the machine is audience-shaped from the beginning. But it goes further than behavior, and this is the part that should genuinely unsettle you. There is an experiment run by the psychologist Tori Higgins that is worth describing carefully. Participants read a description of a stranger. The description was deliberately mixed, ambiguous, the sort of person you could plausibly describe as either confident or arrogant, either careful or timid. Then each participant was asked to describe that stranger to somebody else. And they were told one small thing first. They were told whether their listener happened to like the person or dislike them. You can guess what happened next. People tuned. Describing the stranger to someone who liked them, the ambiguous traits came out warm. Describing the same stranger to someone who disliked them, the same traits came out cold. That much is ordinary politeness. Everyone does it. Then the researchers waited and came back and asked the participants what they themselves actually thought of the stranger. Their own opinions had moved, not toward what they originally read, toward what they had said out loud. The version they had produced for that particular listener had written itself backwards into their own memory, and they now sincerely believed it. Higgins called this the saying is believing effect. Read that across your own life. Each group is not simply receiving a different edition of you. Each group is manufacturing one, and the manufacturing does not stay on the surface as a performance you are aware of giving. It runs backwards into what you remember about yourself. The person you are with your work friends is not a costume over the real thing. It is a genuine self, assembled for that room, and then quietly filed as true. That is why the compartments feel so real from the inside. They are real. Each one has its own memories of you. Here is the part that should be a relief. The psychologist Patricia Linville looked at what happens to people when one area of life goes badly wrong. A job lost, a relationship ended. She measured how many distinct parts people's sense of self was built from, how separate those parts were kept, and then watched who was flattened by the bad event and who was not. The people with more separate selves suffered less. When your identity is one undivided block and a piece of it fails, the failure floods everything, because there is nothing else to be. When it is built from genuinely distinct parts, a failure in one is contained. The gym version of you is untouched by what happened at work. Linville called it self-complexity, and it works like a bulkhead in a ship. The compartments are not evidence of dishonesty. They are what keeps you afloat when one of them floods. So the multiplicity is not the problem. Hold on to that because the mismatch is coming, and it is not where you would expect. Which raises the real question. If having many selves is normal and having many selves is protective, then why does the party still feel like that? Go back. Far back and ask what conditions this machinery was actually built for. For almost the entire span of human existence, you had one audience, and you had it for your whole life. Your camp was perhaps 30 people. Your wider world, the network you could name and who could name you, ran to something like 150. Every one of them had known you since you were born. They knew your parents, they knew your temper, they knew the story of the time you got it badly wrong, and they would still know it in 30 years. And that network spent its evenings maintaining the record. The anthropologist Polly Weisner did something clever with the Jew/Huanzi of the Kalahari. She recorded what people talked about by daylight, and then what they talked about around the fire after dark. The daytime conversations were what you would expect. Practical matters. Land, resources, complaints. The business of getting through a day. The firelit conversations were different in kind. The overwhelming majority of them, around 4 in every 5, were stories about people. Who did what to whom? Who was generous? Who held back? Who could be counted on? And who could not? That is not idle talk. That is the reputation system running its nightly update. Christopher Boehm, who studied how small human groups keep order, described what that system does when it finds a problem. A band has no police and no court and cannot afford someone who takes more than they give. What it has instead is talk. First gossip, then open ridicule. Then people stop including you. And at the end of that ladder, exile. Now hold the two facts together, because their combination is the whole point. Everybody knew you, and everybody talked about you every night to everybody else, which means there was no second audience available. There was nowhere to be a different person. Your reputation was one single file, and every member of the band read the same copy of it. You could not be generous at the fire and stingy on the hunt because the identical people witnessed both, and the gap between them did not go unnoticed. The gap itself became the story about you, and that story decided things that mattered absolutely. Whether meat came your way when your own hunt failed, whether anyone carried you when you were sick, whether anyone stood near you when you had a conflict with someone stronger. Exile was not loneliness. Exile was a slow death sentence, delivered by consensus. There is something else that follows from this, and it is easy to miss because nothing in your life resembles it. You never met anybody. Not really. In a world of 150 faces you had known since birth, meeting a stranger was a rare, dangerous ceremonial event, not a Tuesday. There was no skill called introducing yourself because there was almost nobody left to introduce yourself to. The people who would judge you at 40 were the same people who had watched you at 4, which means yourself did not have to be portable. It did not need a version that could be packed up and presented cold to a room of people with no history of you. It only needed to be maintained continuously in front of witnesses who already held every previous draft. So the machinery in your head, the audience tuner, the sociometer, the self that assembles per room, all of it was built under one enormous constraint. One audience, permanent, fully cross-referenced. That constraint has been gone for about a century, and nothing in you has been told. Count your audiences now. The people at work, the friends from school, your family, that one group chat, the people at the gym, whoever you left behind in the city you moved away from. 6, 7, sometimes more, and here's the structural thing about them. They almost never meet. Each one holds a partial file on you, and each one from the inside feels complete. Nothing cross-checks, no fire, no nightly update, no consensus, which is mostly a gift. You get to choose your people and leave the ones who do not fit, and anyone who has lived in a village where that was impossible will tell you it is the better deal. But your sociometer does not know the deal changed. It is still reporting relational value one room at a time, and it still assumes what it always assumed, that these readings will eventually be summed by a single group who sees all of you. They never get summed. Nobody is doing the addition. So what is that quiet, flat feeling actually reporting if every individual room is going well? That is the actual mismatch, and it explains a feeling that otherwise makes no sense. You can be genuinely well-liked in 6 separate rooms and still carry a flat, unplaceable sense that nobody really knows you. Not because those people are shallow, not because your friendships are thin, Because the thing your mind is waiting for, one audience that holds the complete picture, is a structural feature of a world that no longer exists. 6 partial files do not add up to being known, no matter how warm each one is. And now the twist, because the obvious fix is the wrong one. The obvious fix is integration. Become one consistent person everywhere. Collapse the compartments, tell everyone everything, be the same self in every room. But Linville already showed you the price of that. An undivided self is not a healthier self. It is a more fragile one with no bulkheads where one flood takes everything. Do not dismantle the compartments. They are load-bearing. The shift is much smaller than that, and it is specific. Pick one boundary. One. Then let one true thing cross it. Tell someone in one group a specific thing that belongs to a different group. Not a confession, not a dramatic reveal. Tell the work friend about the thing your brother said. Tell the person at the gym what you actually do for a living and why you stopped enjoying it. One real detail moved deliberately across a wall it does not normally cross. You are not merging the audiences, and you should not try. You are doing something far more precise. You are giving one witness a slightly wider view of the file. That is the input your ancestral wiring spends every day waiting for, and it is the one thing that 6 separate warm rooms cannot manufacture. Because the wiring was never counting rooms. It was counting how much of you any single person could see. And you are not fake for having a different laugh in each one. You are running a reputation system tuned for one permanent audience of 150 who cross-checked everything, inside a life that hands you 7 audiences who never speak to each other. The dread at the party is not guilt. It is that system finding 2 of its rooms in the same place and having no instruction for what to do. You have a laugh you only use around certain people. That is not a mask over the real you. That is your mind doing exactly what it was built to do, in a world that broke its one audience into pieces and never told it. And tonight, one of those pieces can get slightly bigger, with one true sentence carried across a wall.